Spain is a country that's not known for developing groundbreaking video games. We're instead known for playing 20-year-old RPGs, while we hear constant bed screeching in the bedroom next door. But there's always the exception to the rule. Mercury's team is the most accomplished out of every Spanish studio, being responsible for the Castlevania Lords of Shadow games, as well as two separate Metroid titles, Samus Returns and Metroid Dread. More lesser known cases, but still fairly acknowledged, would include an early access title, Project Heartbeat, which seeks to recapture what made the Project Diva game special. And then we have but in recent years, a duology of games have stood their ground as solid products originary of Spain. Nobody would see it coming at the time either. I knew very little going to Blasphemous, outside of essentially being a Metroidvania Dark Souls, and being heavily inspired by Southern Spanish tradition. And me being a fellow Spaniard, the series definitely had an allure to it. Coupled with having pleasant experience with other Metroidvanias, that meant there would at least be a high chance that I'd like these games. I 100%ed both games several times and achieved an S+ rank on each individual Sacred Sorrow for Blasphemous 1. And eventually I thought to myself, damn, these games fuck. I really should make a video talking about them like I did with those other things. Yeah, screw the audience, I'll do whatever I want. So that's the goal for today. We're gonna be chilling out and rambling about why Blasphemous is sick. But if you need a too long didn't watch version, the first one I really liked, the second one I liked less. Both I beat to completion, in-game and with achievements. Let's begin. Blasphemous 1 and 2 were both made by the Game Kitchen and published by Team 17, both of which you have never heard before these two titles. Okay, that's not entirely true. If you happen to be a fan of the series Worms, chances are you actually heard of Team 17 before. I mean, they've developed those games. Beyond that, they haven't captured the same lightning in a bottle. Nowadays, they publish indie titles, similar to Devolver Digital. And sure, those titles may be competent, but they didn't get themselves a Hotline Miami of their own, if that makes any sense. That is, until the kitchen started cooking.
Dinner is served! Never mind, I can hold it.
The Game Kitchen is a Spanish developer team located in Sevilla. They're mostly specialized in pixel art games. Although so far, they only released a total of 3, the ones of today's topic and The Last Door. This last title definitely shows it was a stepping stone to get to grips with how to make a pixel art. Although gameplay-wise, it was pretty much a 90s point-and-click game akin to Monkey Island. It did well critically, but the Game Kitchen clearly wanted to reach further audiences, so they got brainstorming. What's something popular that we could adapt with our 2D pixel art skills? Dark Souls? Yeah, I guess that could work if it wasn't for the fact the Aussies already made 2D Dark Souls. What if we make it take place in a not Spain world with not Christianity in it, and it's largely inspired by Andalusian folk? Dude, that's just Blasphemous. Yep, that's the name of the game. A lot of the themes and design inspirations were rightfully taken from real-world equivalents. The whole thing about the miracle and the worshipping of the Twisted One can be easily traced to Christianity and Jesus Christ. Most of the NPCs you'll meet across the land are actually inspired by several paintings and stories of historical figures. The Kissers of Wounds you meet early on are inspired by the story of Saint Francis of Assisi, who would kiss lepers' foreheads as a sign of mercy and healing their many wounds, without fear of infection. The hideous look of Altasgracias and her side quest is a reference to the Sevillan legend of Santa Librada, where in order to prevent an arranged marriage with the King of Sicily, one of the daughters of the King of Portugal prayed to God to become so repulsive it would cancel the wedding. It succeeded, but it was deemed heretical, hence she was executed. And of course the world itself takes cues from real-life architecture, such as the Bridge of Three Calvaries, which is heavily inspired by the Bridge of Isabel II in Sevilla. The most striking design element of Penitente no doubt is his helmet, which resembles the hat known as a capirote, worn by the Nazarenos during Holy Week, and to this day, unfortunately, it gets mistaken a lot by other pointy hats.
KKK? That's not good.
Originally the design was radically different, resembling more of a generic outlaw character. They thought this too because nobody cared who he was until he put the capirote on. That said, usually capirotes are clothing pieces, not so much iron helmets, which in turn makes the character look as if he's carrying a large weight in his head and shoulders. One could think of it as additional punishment. The games feature Spanish voice acting, but there's also an English dub, as well as several other language options. For once I get to know how the Japanese feel whenever other countries have to resort to subs or dubs to watch the shitty new anime of the season. And honestly, it feels great. To quote Anonymous, the gameplay reminds me of 2D hentai games that are too hard. The game starts with a woman requesting pain to ease her guilt. Fortunately for her, idols can shapeshift and grow a blade. That's mea culpa, guilt given form, and made possible by the miracle. What's the miracle, you may ask? The best possible answer I can give is the ultimate deus ex machina. It's an ethereal entity that can either grant people mercy or suffering, and you bet it prefers the latter in most cases. It's no exception that our protagonist is fated to suffer too. This is Penitente, or the penitent one as the English translation calls him. I'm just gonna call him Penitente, it just sounds better. He's one quiet boy, for that's his punishment, and he'll be the one taking on a long journey throughout the country of Custodia, but he has a tendency to sleep. Clearly taking inspiration from this fact, Spanish people are frequent sleepers. The influence of Dark Souls is very blatant from the very second we take control of Penitente. Yeah, we have flasks, checkpoints that respawn enemies, you leave part of your guild stranded on death, and we have both parries and dodges. Clearly Miyazaki must have snuck on the game kitchen offices to do some shenanigans. Overall, Penitente feels pretty smooth to control, starting off with a basic triple slash and a dodge. Much like in Dark Souls, you restore your health with bile flasks, and you're left vulnerable when doing so use them wisely. To refill the flasks, you need to go to a prie-dieu. These act like checkpoints, where you respawn in case you die. The blue bar represents fervor, which is essentially magic. It's used for either quick use blood boomerangs or prayers. Normally you generate fervor by attacking enemies, but if that proves too slow, you can sacrifice some of your health for some. But currently we can't do shit with it, as we do need prayers for it. As soon as you take care of the designated easy first boss, this tall motherfucker called Deo Gracias will start telling you where to go.
Pesaroso corazón sea, penitente. El tormento del hermano mayor ha terminado. Soy Deo Gracias, testigo y relator de los hechos del milagro doloroso. Esa es mi penitencia, como la vuestra es el silencio. La cuna de la aflicción es lo que perseguís. Esta se encuentra en la madre de madres de las iglesias. Incluso un penitente de sapiencia como yo desconoce lo que hay tras esos altos muros. Pero sí tengo en conocimiento que, según reza la regla, deberéis realizar las 3 humillaciones para ganar el acceso a lo que guardan.
He also gives you a thorn for some reason. Kinda confusing start, but I guess our primary goal is heading right. But some understanding on how the rest of our equipment works would definitely help out. Rosary beads are the most basic. They'll enhance a specific attribute listed. They don't give an in-your-face description of what they do, so you'll have to read their function carefully. Relics essentially work as keys without being straight-up keys. Equipping them will let you traverse whichever obstacle they represent. This is actually the closest we get to using actual upgrades. In most cases don't feel mandatory to beat the game. Prayers serve as your spells, capable of numerous actions. A lot of them consume a heavy chunk of fervor, and the rate you gain it at is not very high, so use them wisely. Mea culpa hearts have the main distinction of being only equipable when kneeling at a save point. For some reason. Otherwise, they're just like rosary beads, but with a catch. Only one heart can be equipped at a time, and they always carry a drawback of some sort, usually boiling down to reducing your defenses. The rest is just standard passive collectibles, like keys and trading items, as well as bones, because that's a totally normal hobby. Last we have Mea Culpa's skill tree. It's visually bare bones, but you'll be glad to unlock this as you go along, because extra techniques pack quite a punch. It's especially visible when going up against bosses, so make sure to unlock them whenever possible. Most Blasphemous runs tend to be pretty straightforward, by heading to the right and choosing either the upper or lower pass. Although spoilers, there's a hidden wall in Albedo that leads to the desecrated cistern early, and after a couple of hoots around Hondo...
Oh shit! Shit! 911 help! 911 help! 911 help! No!
we can find ourselves back at the Silent Brotherhood. Why is this relevant? So you can have faster access to upgrading your rosary's capacity. There's also a war point here, which no doubt adds massive convenience. Additionally, while crossing Hondo, you'll meet with the Pilgrim, who after helping him cross the other side, you'll get faster dodge recovery. It's one of my favorite beats because you can get it very early on, it makes traversal much faster, and it also applies to combat rather nicely. But on a more standard routing, chances are you'll head first to either Mercy Dreams on the bottom right, or the Convent of Our Lady of the Charred Visage at the very top of the map. The former is usually preferred as first destination, but both are equally doable as first choices, including Grievance Ascents, through the shortcut I mentioned earlier. You see, the approach Blasphemous takes to level and enemy design comes down to largely skill over collectibles. Of course, having some of them equipped will make traversal much easier, but realistically, you could beat the game start to finish without collecting the majority of collectibles. Assuming you're not going for a specific ending, mind you. Whenever you die, you don't lose any of your Tears of Atonement, that's the currency in this game, but your fervor becomes more and more limited the more guild fragments you leave behind, so you don't want to leave too many fragments stranded, for the sake of having your prayers available. It's not a popular mechanic, and it's a crystal clear carryover from Dark Souls. Its purpose just comes across as punishing new players by restricting prayer usage. I personally grew accustomed to it, but I can't say it's something I have a deep attachment to. I could easily get rid of it no problem. At every boss fight, you'll find this woman, Viridiana, who is willing to help you out in the fight. All she does is heal some of your health whenever it drops to critical. She's useful enough for new players, but frankly, even if you're a seasoned veteran, you should use her services. Again, spoilers, but leaving her alive until the end of the game doesn't really change anything. You will get her prayer regardless if she lives or dies. And it's a fairly useful one, so might as well get it as early as possible. The bosses themselves can be challenging the first time around. Ten Piedad in particular serves as a good skill filter, making sure you've become familiar enough with the parry and dodge mechanics, while Tres Angustias and the Lady of the Charred Visage train the player on evading different sorts of obstacles. Unlike in real life, donating to church actually has benefits. The most relevant would be turning every prie-dieu into a war point, as well as refilling fervor. It does make regular war points redundant and useless, since there's barely any situation where they're preferred over prie-dieus, and there's naturally far less of them. How much does it cost though? About 20,000 tears. Not cheap. Chances are you'll be spending your tears into more relevant stuff, such as upgrading Mea Culpa. But the mobility it unlocks is definitely worthwhile, so by late game, be sure to donate to the local church every once in a while. After defeating all three bosses, the great door at the bridge will open. But it's obviously not gonna be easy to cross to the other side.
Hermana, que estáis ahí aunque no pueda veros. Escucha mi ruego. Tras vuestra marcha, me toca demostrar que soy digno de la confianza de nuestra capitana. No defraudaré a Crisanta. Y que un gran dolor me muerda si permito que la penitencia cruce esta puerta. ¡En guardia, penitente!
Esdras has been showing up in a couple cutscenes earlier, but now he's ready to face off against you. He's what separates you from reaching the Mother of Mothers. A relentless mid-game battle that will put everything you've learned so far to the test. He's aggressive and fast, and can take hits. But of course his ace in the hole is a familiar enough face. Yeah, that one boss fight we found at the valley, that's Perpetua, Esdras' sister. She only serves as a distraction though, trying to throw you off guard. Your main target should be Esdras nonetheless, but do be careful with both sides.
hermana. Perdonadme. Ahora cruzaré hacia el otro lado del sueño y volveré a vuestro lado.
Now we gained access to the other side of the Iron Tree. What awaits us there is likely not pretty.
Siento como mi sangre se transforma en savia negra y mi vieja piel en rojiza corteza.
Here's where the second half, as I like to call it, begins. Your last hours will be largely condensed within this massive church known as the Mother of Mothers, which is a fusion between the Sevilla Cathedral and the Cordoba Mosque. Here we'll learn the origin of the Twisted One. This individual was the victim, fortunate or otherwise, of the miracle's will, for he explicitly requested to suffer pain as means of easing his guilt. Thus, he fused with the tree stump he was sitting and became one with it, his extremities turning into tree branches and twisting in painful fashion, hence the name of the Twisted One, and managed to endure the whole thing as he only uttered 3 words that would inspire many for years to come.
Mi gran culpa.
Damn. That's deep and all, but I got places to explore. I'm curious to see what lies at the rightmost point of the map. I mean, we started at the leftmost, so it's only natural, right? Oh shit, it's Miriam! Remember her and Bloodstained? No, of course you fucking don't. Miriam was the main character from the successor series to Castlevania, Bloodstained. At some point, Game Kitchen was like, wouldn't it be funny if we did a crossover with some other Metroidvania series? Yeah man, let's get those Hollow Knight guys. Nah, too predictable. Let's try luck and see if Igarashi lets us borrow his pet project series. Miriam doesn't contribute anything to the main story and is here for a small side quest. Small on the surface, at least. Clearly she's not from Custodia and has to return to, Great Britain, I assume? But to do so, she needs to restore a mirror so she can get access to the other side. You're then tasked with finding 5 separate portals that will contain mirror shards. But first, you must clear a platforming challenge beforehand.
Give it to him! Give it to him! Boom shakalaka!
Let me tell ya, these are some of the most painful segments in the game. The smallest mistake can lead to repeating everything, so you'll be here for a while until you get it right. At least deaths have no penalty to it, so you should be somewhat safe. It's also a good enough excuse to give some purpose to movement rosary beads that would normally go unused. Even still, a low point of the game for sure. Collecting all shards will complete the mirror portal. Miriam bids you farewell, but not before gifting you a new prayer. That isn't all that impressive, all things considered. Yay. Anyhow, let's get back to the main game. The structure of the second half is virtually identical to that of the first one. Collect 3 MacGuffins in order to progress, this time in the form of masks to activate an elevator at the rooftops. What is this, Majora's Mask? The places are far more structured instead of being scattered across the wilderness. Everything feels much more connected to each other, such as the library or the gallery with a giant child that rips you off like a Beyblade. And who could forget the prison with the screaming guys? Not to mention, the Mother of Mothers itself is a large enough place that houses its share of side quests, like the Miriam one I mentioned earlier, and the end of the Pilgrim's Journey.
¿Qué más castigo queréis, oh pecados míos?
I mean, I could think of one right now, but that's besides the point. By this point, if you've been exploring enough of Custodia, you should hopefully be fairly equipped, provided you were able to find all the health and fervor upgrades, as well as unlocking all rosary slots you could, and upgrading Mea Culpa. All of this doesn't outright make the game easy, but if you make good use of your tools, the challenge is significantly lowered. One thing I don't like about the inventory is that everything is sorted by time of acquisition, with no way of filtering how you'd like it to be displayed. It's not that big of a deal, but it gets confusing on replays. I would have preferred if everything had a designated slot. Small rant aside, once you collect the last mask, the elevator will take you to the very top, where you'll encounter the woman that first killed you. Oh yeah, about that. There's a prequel comic detailing Penitente getting a hold of Mea Culpa, this very woman being present and killing him, fully expecting him to be brought back by the miracle. Thought you should know.
Penitente en el desvelo. portando la espada culpable, habéis cometido los más graves delitos contra la Madre y sus santos, contra el milagro y sus brotes. Se nos ha encomendado que acabemos con vuestro propósito. Yo, Crisanta en penitencia, os excomulgo, os expulso, os execro, con la bendición de nuestro milagro del mayor dolor. Y así se borre vuestro nombre bajo los cielos.
Crisanta is bound to kick your ass during your first outings. She's fast-paced and unpredictable. Her sword swings can be constantly mistaken between one another, and she occasionally mixes it up with a parry. Those are arguably her most dangerous attacks. The aerial dive is fast but easy to predict, and so are the phantom thrusts during the second phase. She will take some time, but she's far from impossible. Once defeated, she'll leave herself open for execution.
Adelante. Purgad mi alma mordida por el milagro.
Only to run away at the end. Okay. What lies ahead is the end of the road, the final boss, His Holiness Escribar. You've caught glimpses of him throughout the game, but it's difficult to process what he may truly look like. But if you have any pending tasks left, you're still more than free to go back to wherever you need to. The game is also merciful enough to have placed a war point nearby in case you need it. Nonetheless, if you beat Crisanta, you can more than beat Escribar.
En mi sueño vi vuestros pasos acercarse. En mi sueño quise hablaros y presentarme. Soy las manos de piel de sangre. Soy los ojos por los que mira nuestra madre. Mas nada sé de vos. Nada que no sea vuestro frío rostro sin nombre. No, nada sé de vos. Solo el milagro sabe. Ahora que tu espada llena de culpa con la mía de oros choque. Por siempre os maldigo en el nombre. Por siempre os bendigo en la muerte.
Escribar is a deceiving son of a bitch. Sure, his first phase doesn't last for very long, but his spells can cause some serious damage if you're not careful. Most of them will also try to set some distance between you and him, so be sure to have a couple Lorquianas handy.
Habéis roto el espejo en el que me veíais dormido. Ahora me veis despierto como hijo del milagro verdadero.
The Son of the Miracle is just annoying more than anything. You first have to damage its sword before hitting the head on top. Problem is, the sword has the tendency of going off screen, so you'll have to wait for it to come back. Beyond that, be careful with the fire attack in particular, as it's not easy to dodge and can cause serious damage. But once you get the hang of it, you win the game. Well, almost. Your fate is still yet to be decided, as Penitente bears witness of the Cradle of Affliction, the Turned Throne, atop the gargantuan pile of ash. Will he succeed in climbing it? Well, no.
La montaña de ceniza que engulló pecados y pecadores por igual, no ha tenido piedad con vos tampoco. A merced del milagro estabais y a merced del milagro quedáis. Ya no sois otra cosa que un rostro anónimo más, sin voz, sin gesto. Vuestra penitencia ha terminado.
That was just a bunch of cheap walk cycles!
What a rip.
Alright, let's get the good ending.
Stop hacking! 3, 4, 5 headshots and 0 kills.
What we just saw is labeled as ending B. I guess because B stands for bad. So now we gotta aim for ending A, which stands for amazing? Sure, it works. Here's the gist of things. There's this unassuming rosary bead located at the mountains, with arguably the most vague description of all. What you have to do is equip said bead and kill yourself about 3 times. Instead of dropping a guild shard, the bead will absorb the guild until becoming pitch black. Once that's over, you have to track down the confessionary statues and destroy them. Wait, you can always do that? A portal will show up and can only be accessed with the corrupted bead from earlier. What follows is an enemy rush. It's not too bad for the sake of grinding resources. Hell, it even gives you some equipment for your struggles. So if nothing else, it has some practicality for the early game. Of course, if you know about it, that is. After the fight, you'll notice that you seem to be getting a new item. Except, that's the thorn Deogracias gave you, growing with each victory. Repeat this status smashing 6 more times and you're good to go. Now how in the unholy hell are you supposed to figure all that shit out on your own? The final boss has no changes after doing all this. It's the cutscene afterwards that is altered, as you are allowed to climb the pile of ash all the way to the turned throne. Penitente then stabs himself with mea culpa and dies for good. His body becomes tree branches, and the populace start prostrating upon him. Thus a new age of worship begins.
Y así llegó el momento de la comunión final, con la espada nacida de la culpa. Un último sacrificio para terminar su penitencia y con la impiadosa voluntad del milagro doloroso. Pero los designios del milagro son caprichosos. La penitencia no termina nunca, mas cambia, duele y condena a voluntad propia. No hay lugar para el penitente al otro lado del sueño. Su lugar está aquí, entre nosotros. Él es el nuevo padre y el último hijo del milagro, destino de nuestras oraciones, por los siglos de los siglos.
But before it all ends, Crisanta shows up and takes mea culpa away.
Y así se borre vuestro nombre bajo los cielos.
Why? I guess you didn't take kindly that the Miracle sent you as Escribar's replacement. Yeah, the big twist is that you were a puppet of the Miracle all along, meant to do the same shit Escribar did. Bummer way to end the journey, I guess. I haven't touched a lot upon the story because, truth be told, it's explained in a quite convoluted fashion. You're only given a big goal at the start of the game. Good luck, here's a thorn, figure out what to do, lol. Now, the game does explain most of the events, but it's done by hiding lore away in item descriptions. For instance, the reason the turned throne was all the way in a pile of ash was due to Escribar, his original form, turned into a massive tree akin to the Twisted One, and eventually burned down for a month and a half. Hence why the room where his embodiment lies is full of ash. Anyone that tried climbing all the way towards the turned throne would be transformed into mindless beasts to do the miracle's bidding. It sucks that Penitente dies in both endings. To be honest, in this sort of game with a constant depressing tone, it's not surprising. But at least he got worshipped in ending A, and got a comfy chair as a reward. Alright, let's get the true ending. True Torment is the new game plus of Blasphemous. You get to keep your equipment, save for health and fervor enhancements and rosary slots. The items you failed to collect will still be available, while the ones you already have are turned into cash in the overworld. Enemies can take and deal extra damage, so you'll have to be more careful. What's great is that you can revisit several spots much earlier than usual, since you get to keep the relics. It's honestly my preferred way of playing the game, because of how much you can get away early on, and it elevated my enjoyment of Blasphemous as a whole, something the base game alone would have likely not satisfied. You also get access to one of 3 additional penances, adding a couple bonuses and several penalties to your journey. I played all 3 of them, so you know my word about them is true and honest. Bleeding Heart transforms your health bar into individual hit points. Any damage you take will deplete 1 point regardless of defense. Enemies also respawn on screen transition, which I guess is convenient for farming, not so much for backtracking. And flasks only restore 1 health point, but do enable a gradual recovery for your other hit points. It's a loss whenever you get hit though. It might be the most fun because it completely changes how you approach the game. Some areas may become more difficult, but it makes late game areas much easier, since any of the insane damage enemies deal is reduced to 1 out of potentially 9 health points. And given defense is a non-factor, you can get more wacky with your builds. Not too bad, I give it a 4 out of 5. Unwavering Faith is the Magician playthrough. Your sword deals less damage, but Fervor is now regenerative, so you can theoretically spam prayers more reliably. You do lose Fervor if you get hit though, objectively the least interesting of all three. I'll admit I'm more of a sword player and not so much a spellcaster, so not being able to rely on big sword damage was a bummer. And other side effects don't feel all that inspired. True guilt is the equivalent of investing in some shitcoin. If you die, all your Tears of Atonement will go with a guilt fragment. Die again, and if you didn't collect that fragment, you can kiss goodbye to all of your savings.
Fuck! Oh shit! Oh shit, dude! What the fuck? I just lost $1,500. What the fuck?
To make matters worse, all your flasks recover fervor instead of health. 1 health bar between checkpoints, baby. What could possibly go wrong? Well, not as much as you'd think. For clips of New Game Plus, I'll be showing off primarily True Guilt, given I had the belief it would make the game much more difficult. And yeah, there were some bullshit moments because I chose to do Hondo early again, but beyond that, if you upgraded your sword enough in your normal playthrough, it shouldn't be that much of a struggle either way.
Damn, bitch! Got him! Got him! Got your ass, bitch!
It also helps that I didn't see much of a need to upgrade flasks, given I was going with a flaskless build for achievement purposes. Oh, and for the health issue, you just spam Saeta Dolorosa as a makeshift flask. Take that, America! Regardless of the ending you get, beating New Game Plus with either of these penances enabled will grant you a reliquary of its respective penance, enabling its primary positive aspect: extra recovery from Bleeding Heart, automatic fervor from Unwavering Faith, and fervor flasks from True Guilt. And they're great additions for the sake of adding some extra hours on future playthroughs. Anyway, we got both endings A and B, but what if I told you there's an ending C? That's what the Wounds of Eventide expansion sets out to explore, this being the last free DLC for the game and providing the actual canonical ending. And it managed to do so in a cohesive enough fashion. There's this area called Echoes of Salt to the bottom right of Hondo, where we can find Perpetua's Doom, who manages to communicate with Penitente and informs him that the miracle is full of shit and there's beings from beyond stringing everything, and you'll require Estra's assistance. Given he's hellbent on killing you, she gives you a token that will make him reconsider. You get to skip Estra's fight like this, but now the tables have turned. Your target isn't exclusively Escribar, but the ones likely controlling him and the miracle, known as the High Wills. Only the one known as the Traitor holds the way to progress forward, but it must be found first. Esdras tells you to head to the Library of Negated Words, where it should be somewhere deeply hidden. And lo and behold, oh yeah, I'm doing this New Game Plus on a save file with every collectible found. It gives you Miura's heart for the record. That's a nice touch. I too miss the Master of Idolmaster. The Traitor then requests your aid, as its vision has been stripped from him, and you need to quite literally recover his eyeballs. One located within catacombs and the other in a deep cave so massive it can even generate rain. Somehow. Well, to access the boss on Albero's catacombs, we better start collecting bones. And they just so happen to be reset with every New Game Plus, so it's best we start to look them up. The fuck is this shit? Oh man, this is trippy. I feel the sudden urge to make a so retro joke all of a sudden. I suppose they planned for a classic Vania game, much like Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, but they probably didn't feel like, oh great, the game turned itself into a Game Boy game. Oh look, it's that one enemy that I've seen a few times, but otherwise didn't think much about. Yeah, that was strange. Anyhow, let's go back to collect bones. We need a total of 30, so let's just speed shit up.
and hot.
Huh. A Grim Reaper woman with a defining skill of singing. Next thing you're gonna tell me, there's also an Austrian chicken that runs a fast food restaurant. Anyhow, Isidora is where the difficulty of the bosses takes a sharp turn upwards. She's very fast and bulky with very few openings, and likes to drag the fight with her flame pillars and fireballs. Well, I didn't know what to expect, but it's pretty clear fire resistance will be of help. Let me equip it real quick. That's right, once you start the fight, the singing of the dead cannot be stopped. Quite literally. It's a good thing she's next to the Albedo save point, making retries a non-issue, but once inside, your equipment is locked in, so be sure to plan beforehand. Either way, nothing some patience and well-timed parries cannot handle, right? Alright, what's next? Morning on Havoc is the final area you'll visit in your journey. Well, at least it should be your last one. It's accessible as soon as you deal with Esdras, and you can access part of it during your trip through Echoes of Salt. It features by far the most hostile enemies and environmental hazards. Lacking the proper equipment will equal a swift death, so be sure to have at least space for several defense beats. The music here might be my personal favorite though. It's melancholic yet threatening at the same time. It could very well fit in an Oddworld game. I guess it might be this part that really draws me in. There's not that much in terms of collectibles. Really, this area is an obstacle course to your way towards the Traitor's Eye, and who better to guard it than a big fucking snake? Sierpes is not a particularly complex boss. It's got fairly straightforward attacks that are decently challenging to dodge. What is more noteworthy is that this boss is split in 3 phases, although all it adds is extra attacks, from which side is attacking, and whether there's wind or not. It's a very tanky boss fight, so try not to run your patience short. The music gives it a God of War vibe to it. It's just like you're about to bring down a massive mythological creature. They don't even let me finish my sentence. Can't have shit in Custodia. I find it particularly interesting how these 2 brand new bosses contrast with each other. Isidora is very offense focused, with highly aggressive moves that require patience to properly block, and even applying a harsh restriction to your equipment. Sierpes, on the other hand, is a massive wall, a test of endurance above all else. Not to say its attacks are undangerous, but they're definitely more predictable. Well, that's 2 eyeballs down, so let's go practice some ophthalmology. We're then told that the traitor was able to witness the High Wills, the ones taking a hold of the miracle. But his other 3 brethren backstab him for committing such a heinous crime. But before being sealed beneath the 3-knot tree, he took with himself mea culpa's true heart, capable of causing the deepest of wounds, the one to the soul. In gameplay that means extra damage, but you can't remove it once equipped, so if you want to experiment with other stuff for longer, equip it at the last moment possible. This heart is the one thing that can make Chrysanta take your side in the battle against the Miracle and the High Wills. So it's required for her fight specifically, but we can take some time until then. One last thing that makes New Game Plus worthwhile is the addition of 5 new bosses. At the start you're given a bell, which you have to take to this hidden cave, Petrus, a small and assuming area we can find early at the Holy Line. There you'll meet this hideous trumpet guy known as Hibrael, who will show up throughout your travels across Custodia, in order to summon 4 separate glass coffins. Inside these, one can find nothing but an arduous challenge. The Amanecidas are the last opponents left for Penitente to face off against. Each one has their separate weapons and attacks, all with a respective element. They all share one key technique, this crystal barrier that nullifies all damage for a couple hits. They always start with it, and you need to break it before damaging them for real. Afterwards, they'll occasionally try to regenerate it. They're difficult in the sense that most of their attacks can appear as near impossible to dodge, the sword Amanecida being a shining example, but they're all bosses that require patience above all else, and also having a good strategy, such as having extensive resistance to their element. But I did mention that there's 5 new bosses to New Game Plus.
Saeta que ha roto los espejos de mi tumba. Enciende los ojos de mis 5 rostros muertos. Más de 1000 años de condena han sido el castigo por haber permitido crecer dentro de mí una virtuosa, pero prohibida pasión, bordada en luz. Pero solo el milagro concede. Solo el milagro despoja. A cambio de mi despertar, me ordena que ponga fin a vuestro propósito de infamia penitente. Ya amanece tras la noche larga.
Laudes is the first and last of the Amanecidas, the end of your treacherous journey, and I've gotta be honest, this is pretty tame. She uses all of the weapons from the previous Amanecidas, and also recycles most of their attacks, while getting rid of arguably the most dangerous ones. She switches weapons each fourth of her health lost. It's a boss that, again, requires patience, but there isn't much struggle if you recall your previous battles. I wish she would mix up attacks between each of her weapons, rather than just rely on one at a time. It could be more bullshit if handled poorly, but it certainly would be more interesting than rehashing 4 previous bosses into one.
Pasión mía que una vez fuiste oro, vuelve ahora a mi cuerpo.
And your rewards for such a difficult task? A prayer that consumes an absurd amount of fervor, and a heart that lets you sprint. I guess it works. Let's finish the game. Going into Crisanta, nothing really changes. That is until you down her for the first time.
Esa espada que portáis. Las altas voluntades cantan que rehuye el beso de su acero, pues la herejía de su portador lo embadurna por completo. Las grandes, desde las procesiones eternas, claman que luche hasta mi último estertor. Las 3. Las altas voces sentencian que vuestra ejecución no puede ser postergada. Temo, pues, mi penitencia aún no ha acabado. No mientras sus voces retumben. No mientras vuestro silencio perdure.
Crisanta's second battle is nearly identical to the first, only much more relentless. All of her attacks got significantly faster, and pairing her slashes causes a heavy shock that puts major distance. On her last breath, she'll start generating sword waves, which is a pretty free attack, all things considered. The changes aren't large, but sure are significant. But with patience and good pattern recognition, all is doable.
Penitente.
Wins. Friendship. Friendship?
Escribar's fights aren't different either. It all changes until you climb the pile of ash once again and ascend to the dream. But keep in mind you'll need to also follow the steps for ending A in order to climb it, otherwise you still get ending B.
Henos aquí. mi figura desnuda en granate, y vos a este lado del sueño.
Escribar Phase 3 is a cutscene boss. You're actually unkillable during this boss fight unless you fall into a pit. Any damage taken can only lower your health bar to 1. Some of his attacks may be obnoxious to dodge, but so long as you don't fall down it's easy enough. Maybe it was meant to be a power trip boss or just to showcase his wither state even within the dream. But otherwise, a bit disappointing for a true final boss. Cool finisher though, I'll give it that.
Penitente, que venís ante nuestras presencias.
Somos las altas voluntades.
Habéis llegado hasta aquí para expiar vuestro pecado, para poner fin a esta obra.
Destruyendo nuestra carne que una vez fue palabra, y que quede solo silencio.
Y que nosotras bajemos los ojos, dejando huérfano al milagro.
Y así, la última de nuestras voluntades sea la de vuestra condena eterna. No habrá penitencia alguna que exonere este pecado. El precio a pagar por la mayor de las blasfemias.
You may be wondering what would C in ending C stand for. Cojonudo, that's what. It may not be immediately obvious, but I think this approach for a different ending works way better than the one present by default. It's a reward for going out of your way to explore a set of areas before making any further progress. Its downside is that missing a single step locks you out of this ending, but I think it's more fair for not having uncovered most of the world's secrets and items. I was able to get ending C during my first run because I made it my goal to explore the entire first half of the map before crossing the bridge, and I was rewarded with Perpetua's blessing, letting me skip Esdras and proceed through this pathway. I did get ending B first though, because I didn't figure out the Immaculate Beach shit. But on my own case, not everyone will head to Echoes of Salt before Esdras, so it's definitely up to preference. Given I was able to pull it off, it's only natural I think of it highly, but it's not automatically the best solution. Or maybe it is, who knows. So now that you've beaten the game enough to carry all reliquaries, is there anything else left to do? To some degree, yeah, there is. The Sacred Sorrows is just boss rush mode. If you just want to confront any of the bosses without having to replay the entire game, this has you covered. There's a total of 6 separate runs, 2 for the first and second half of the game, the entire base game gauntlet, all 5 Amanecidas, the base game gauntlet and the Amanecidas, and everyone plus the Wounds of Eventide bosses. The game gives you health and fervor refills between fights, but limiting only 10 flasks over 19 bosses is daunting. Thankfully the game is generous enough to feature refills for these refills, but that only applies on the 5th and last Sorrows. The last Sacred Sorrow in particular comes close to matching the Pantheon of Hallownest in terms of difficulty. Its main gimmick is that with the exception of Chrysanta, who will always be the final boss, all other bosses are randomized. Let me remind you, Isidora is present and she still disables menus, so be sure to have fire resistances handy for that one. At the end of a run, you're given a set of statistics and a rank on how well you've performed. You can safely ignore all the information above, only time affects the final ranking. If you seek to achieve an S+ on every Sorrow in both difficulties, know that the times can be pretty tight on earlier stages, but the latter ones become much more lenient. For real, I struggled to beat Sorrow 6 for the longest time on True Torment, but remarkably once done I actually got the S+, So indeed some of the later times only come across as intimidating and nothing more. And what's your reward for getting S+ on everything? A skin for Penitente. To be fair, Hollow Knight only gave you a shitty journal entry after beating all of Godhome, so I'll fucking take it. Overall, despite some complaints, I really like this game, if it wasn't apparent enough. I went as far as getting all of the achievements, I beat the game with every single penance, and I unlocked all of the skins available, except the Kickstarter backer one.
Oh shit, here we go again.
It's largely carried by the controls, Penitente just feels smooth to handle, and the combat is entertaining. There's a certain satisfaction in finding ways of exploiting each enemy and boss, trying out weird combinations whenever possible, and of course its visual aesthetics also carry it for its long run. Unforgettable experience throughout, even if the story, if you ask me, was on the average end. So, how does the sequel stack? Blasphemous 2 came out last year and was teased alongside the trailer for Wounds of Eventide. When I first picked it up and finished it to completion, I had mixed feelings, and ultimately thought the first one was a better experience. That's partially supported by the sheer amount of extra content Blasphemous 1 features, but I guess it's not a fair comparison between 5 years of fixes and DLCs versus just 1 year period. First of all, I want to address the subject of controls in this game. Normally I tend to bind the buttons for every game in ways I find more comfortable. This usually applies to shooters because I'm of the rare breed that uses the mouse with the left hand. Hence I remap everything around IJKL instead of the classic WASD. But Blasphemous isn't a shooter. A controller is the preferred option. And that's true, but for a time my controller broke and I clutched some of the later playtime with a keyboard. Thing is, it went smoothly with Blasphemous 1, so why is it an issue here? It's just buggy and messed up, that's all. Hopefully it gets patched out, alongside other things we'll see along the way. Our sequel story begins with a badly damaged Crisanta entering some church and killing herself. Behind her, someone resembling Penitente enters the scene, although that's only in appearance. I mean, he can talk, and he's also not dead, but that last point is about to become irrelevant.
I'm gonna do some push-ups.
Penance never ends, boys. Our guy Penitente returns once again by wish of the miracle. Yeah, you can likely justify anything by saying the miracle did it. It's the perfect scapegoat. That said, we need to prepare ourselves as we didn't get to keep anything we collected. What, did you really think that I actually allow you to keep anything? What, are you stupid? At the end of Blasphemous 1, we see Mea Culpa disintegrated, so now we get 3 brand new weapons that came out of nowhere. The miracle did it. We have Ruego al Alba, Sarmiento y Centella, and Veredicto. If it wasn't apparent enough by their designs, their core differences are speed and damage. Ruego al Alba is the middle ground and likely most people's first choice. If not physically, it just resembles Mea Culpa the closest in terms of gameplay. Sarmiento y Centella can stab at a rapid fashion, but its damage output is on the lower end. It reminds me of the recoil rod from Mega Man 03, although much less game breaking. And Veredicto has a fair range and deals a heavy amount of damage, but spamming it is not that viable. Still, if you were miffed about not being able to play as Esdras for whatever reason, here's your fix. You can only choose one weapon at the start, but don't worry, you'll eventually find the rest of them at other places. In terms of controls, he's just about the same. You slash, you slide, you flask, the works. But he feels stiff in a way it's difficult for me to describe. I don't know, for some reason he doesn't feel as agile. That said, his dodging is a lot more consistent for actually dodging attacks, which is a sure improvement. Upgrading your equipment also took a different approach. Marks of Martyrdom are essentially a premium currency of sorts, and they're used for several upgrades. They can be found in several locations, defeating bosses or after grinding enough enemies. The game doesn't leave tiers completely useless though, as they're still used to buy other items or remove your guild. Spellcasting, or prayer casting rather, is also different. There's 2 separate categories. Chants and Bursts. Bursts are rapid fire casts that usually deal medium damage and consume a mild amount of fervor, while Chants last longer, deal more damage, but obviously consume more fervor. They both use the same button, but you duck in order to activate Chants over Bursts. As seen with the intro, the cutscenes received a brand new art direction. It's serviceable, but I do miss the more pixelated and gruesome looking cutscenes of the first game. They mixed really well with the gameplay aesthetic and were somewhat interchangeable with each other, while here, it doesn't mesh as well. Nonetheless, you're told by Amanecidas here about your current task at hand.
Who the fuck are you?
That being putting a stop to the upcoming birth by the miracle. And to start off, you need to collect 3 regrets in order to lower those big fuck-off statues holding the temples above them. However, a series of penitents known as the Archconfraternity seek to stop Penitente's goal, these being composed by Orospina, Benedicta, Odon and Blasphemous, and their leader Eviterno. Now, I'm not sure if I'm alone in this, but they ended up reminding me a lot of Mega Man Zero's 4 Guardians, in terms of how they're presented as the most direct threat to Penitente, and also by how they all work under the same wing, more or less. Actually, come to think of it, whatever happened to Deogracias, as well as Esdras, we never see either of them again in this game, so it's left as a loose end. Okay, in Deogracias' case, he technically never left Penitente's side, but chances are he died of age if it's been too long, which I guess crosses out Esdras' fate as well. Welcome to the City of the Blessed Name. I hope you like the place because you're gonna visit it a hell of a lot. Gotta love the music of the place though, it's calm and soothing. In fact, the soundtrack of Blasphemous 2 is great. It's far more energetic than the first game, not as dominated by ambient music. That is, of course, if the music chooses to play. Yeah, these games are great, but sure lack polish. The first accessible building features a man known as Montañez, a blind sculptor willing to help you with your equipment. He grants you the altarpiece of favors, and it essentially works as this game's rosary. Now the actual rosary makes a return, but its beads are now exclusively for defensive purposes only, or resource farming. The figures obtained for the altarpiece have more substantial upgrades, like enhanced physical attack, prayers, and so on. The main drawback is that it's just as, if not more restricted, than Mea Culpa hearts in terms of changing your setup. You have to revisit Montañez each time you wish to change a couple of figures. It's made trivial thanks to the game giving you Mirabas of Sayport very early on, meaning you can always go back to the city at any point. And it's not until the very end of the game where you get the possibility of changing figure setups at pre-DS. Certain figure combinations actually have special properties. The easiest to figure out is having 2 of the same category next to each other, but they can get much more involved, so be sure to try combinations, see if you fancy anything. Other places of interest are the Confessor, which is the only place you can restore guilt. And about guilt, it's important to make a distinction that it also works differently than the last game. You still lose a fragment when you die, but you may notice that sometimes when recovering it, your fervor bar remains affected. That's not a bug, it's a brand new mechanic where each death accumulates enough guilt to leave leftovers, even after recovering any missing fragments. In other words, after a while, you'll have to visit the Confessor, should you keep dying of course. It's a change I'm pretty opposed to, like the original was already controversial, but making it more involved like that was not the way to go. Sure, the game explains it to you, but to be honest, most people are gonna ignore that. I sure did, thinking it was the same shit as usual. Lastly, we have the Lady of the Chalice, who will upgrade your health bar as well as flask capacity and performance. But before we can get to her, we need the power up to do so. That's right, the main element that sets Blasphemous 1 and 2 apart is power-ups. Most of the map traversal and upgrades are locked behind certain power-up oriented obstacles, so now it will be of interest to hunt them down as soon as you can. This includes previously doable actions like wall jumping. Oh, I guess you didn't wall jump before you were wall stabbing. As is to be expected with power-ups in mind, several collectibles will be locked away until much later. But given the more traditional and much less linear design in this game, it's highly advisable you mark on the map spots where you can see a collectible but can't reach it yet, otherwise trying to 100% the game will become far more obnoxious. You're still free to go to whichever area you like from the available selection, either to the left through the Aqueduct of the Costales, or the right through Grillson Ruin. It's not like there's any other spots present for you to visit anyway. Also, a lot of these places visually feel like a long amount of time has passed between the events of the first game and now. In particular, the returning Mother of Mothers being completely abandoned and occupied by persistent worshippers of the miracle and scavengers. At the entrance of a few bosses, you'll encounter this woman, Yerma. She's essentially the stand-in for Viridiana, and at least she's given a small backstory of how she managed to escape the influence of the miracle when she was young and during her stay at 2 Moons.
Oh, bienvenido seáis, visitante, a esta mesa de reproches e intrigas.
Oh shit, he's Galician. Yeah, I don't care who's right or wrong, I'm going with this guy. Upgrading pre-DS is back, but it's not as convenient as before. You see, much like your average streamer that keeps getting bad faith donations.
Hi Mark, hope you're doing well, mates. That was from Icewallow. Come.
The church turned donations off, so no brain dead upgrading for pre-DS. Instead, you need to rescue a bunch of nuns, or cobijadas as they're called. It makes more sense it was done like this. The old upgrading system wasn't made abundantly clear, but once you figured it out, it was fairly effortless. If you want to fast travel between all pre-DS, you'll need 6 out of 9 cobijadas. Nice. Each currently available location houses the weapons you're missing, except for the one you picked up. There you'll find tears instead. If I can commend the game for one thing, is the weapons being much more versatile than they let on initially. With good button timing, it's possible to make a couple skips and get equipment much earlier than intended. All of this is possible thanks to Benedicto's functions, or activating its flames. In that regard, I think the game succeeds more than the first game. It grants you a lot of options to fuck around with, including the altarpiece figures. And it never makes it blatantly obvious given it's not fully intended. You'll have to get very creative for some of these though. After visiting the main points of interest, all 3 statues lower, we make our way to the elevated temples, and the best song in the game kicks in. We have to get to the top of the level to meet with this guy, known as the Witness. His story has been told across the previous bosses, where a couple wished upon the miracle to conceive a child, but the result was the least expected thing possible, being born already as an adult and with sick black wings. Too bad his presence alone killed everyone in the room, because of a lack of faith in the miracle. Actually, Patrick's ugly duck story is like the perfect summary. It's also incredibly blatant that this was a direct reference to the birth of Christ. You know, you got the father and mother, and the son that was born thanks to godly presences. The whole freeing doves thing is weird though. I can only relate it to the symbol of peace, where a dove is carrying a branch in its mouth. But that's a loose connection. Still, we have to break them all free from their cages, in order to open the mother's gate and put a stop to the birth. Thus, Operation Freebird is in full motion, as your task now is to seek out the remaining 4 bosses and get rid of them. Your first destination is back at the Crown of Towers, where this transparent one showed up in the middle out of nowhere. And wait just a second, I recognize this fucking setup. And this is a structure that the second half follows. You head to a place, beat its boss, and the next one unlocks shortly after. It's strange that it's made this linear, and I don't really see why. It's on the same level as Metroid Fusion. Okay, it's not that bad, you don't choke on long cutscenes here. But I don't really know why you couldn't have all places open at the same time. The locations are at least interesting enough. We have the tower dominated by a Mario Bros arcade gimmick, a water cathedral with its ink puddles that only exist as cheap shots, and an upside down wax tower. They all got their share of unique quirks to it. Like the Severed Tower has a... Am I allowed to show that and still get monetized? By the way, killer soundtrack and sound design we got for the dumb boss fight. The second half is also where we get our 2 missing movement upgrades. An air dash, which becomes integral for combat and movement alike, so a great addition overall, and grabbing on hooks. Hey. Some of the platforming challenges these upgrades pose are fairly tricky, and there's several of these in previous areas. But by this point, chances are you could cheese certain upgrades. Major shoutouts to Benedicto's spin attack. That's rad, although you're still gonna require the upgrade nonetheless. Not for this boss fight though, just in general. 2 Moons is the most unique area. We've seen this massive platform a couple of times, as well as the reflection of a mansion at the lake. Then you enter the mansion once it materializes and It's just a compressed version of Symphony of the Night. I mean, at least the level design is adjusted for terrain reversals. I'll give it that. But truth be told, I'm feeling lazy, so I'll just skip to the boss.
Oh, hello there!
At the end of it, we see Yerma not feeling fully confident on fighting the next boss. We just did. What happens next decides whether she lives or dies, that is, giving her this item, the Holy Oil of Anointment, found at the elevated temples. The problem is that going to the mirror version of the boss room without having given her the oil deems her dead, as she charges immediately within the boss chamber and dies then and there. Yeah, a bit of a bullshit mechanic I wasn't even aware of in my first time playthrough. The difference on letting Yerma live or not is that you gain one item or another, but whatever item you miss can be bought back at this guy Casto. That said, I got none of them? Yeah, remember the escape we did to get to Susona earlier? I think that completely bugged the game out, and Yerma isn't showing up, so oops! Luckily none of her rewards are mandatory to beat the game. I wish the devs acknowledged escape in a future past, that'd be hilarious. After beating Susona, everyone at the Chamber of the Five Doves dies. Hate it when that happens. But the gates to the final area are now open. Crimson Reigns is the last area in the game. It's all a mostly straight path to the top, with really tight platforming and the hardest hitting enemies roaming everywhere. A massive gauntlet, but not an unfair one. Every now and then, checkpoints will be made available in case you die, where a platform will take you to a previous spot. It's very climactic and the aesthetic is just right. And once you make it to the top, you meet with the man you got a small glimpse of at the start.
Esta espera, esta interminable espera ha sido mi penitencia. Milagro mío, atended mi ruego. Otorgadme vuestra bendición para cumplir con vuestra santa encomienda. Pues soy el primer penitente, y vos seréis el último.
At first glance, Eviterno doesn't come across as too difficult. All of his attacks are ranged for sure, but are very easy to dodge and he doesn't seem to have all that much health. Yeah, no doubt this is building up to something much worse.
Ahora que las cintas carmesí finalicen lo que una vez empezaron. Mi penitencia aún no ha terminado.
The second phase is where you're gonna be stuck the most. His patterns are very fast-paced and seemingly unpredictable at first, except they're actually heavily scripted. It's all a matter of dodging his attacks accordingly and exerting plenty of patience. Starting to get major Mega Man 04 vibes out of this boss, but I can't really tell you why. But alas, the best boss fight in the game has to fall down eventually, as Penitente manages to kill Eviterno for good.
El hijo ha nacido.
Well, fuck.
voluntad superior, padres incorpóreos e inescrutables, soy el heredero de vuestra luz. ¿Por qué, pese a ser coronado con vuestra gloria, censuráis mi presencia junto a vosotros? Si este enfrentamiento es prueba de la dignidad de vuestra gloria, que así sea.
Incarnate Devotion as a boss fight is a major step down compared to El Eterno. That seems to be a running theme in both games. Nail the one boss before the end of the game, but sleep on the final one. It's fine though, sword fights are the most awesome shit in existence and near impossible to surpass. But of course, this being a Blasphemous game, just getting to the final boss will get you the bad ending.
Ahora lo comprendo. Y por ello os doy gracias. Este dolor es mi sacramento bautismal, que nos reunirá en comunión para consumarlo, en el que naceremos como un nuevo símbolo encarnado, colmado de devociones. El comienzo de una nueva era para el milagro. El segundo salmo.
Truth be told, I don't like being a tree, so how do we do? You'll need to collect 4 separate figures: Cierzo, Jaloque, Gregal, and Leveche.
Leveche?
Each one is usually acquired by finishing a series of major side quests. They are distinct from other figures by featuring a golden ribbon, and seem to point to a specific direction. If they're all placed pointing at the center of the altarpiece, each one will turn golden. So you must head back to the Chapel of the Five Doves with that setup, and the Father's door will open. You'll have to sacrifice all 4 statues, and in exchange you'll gain the incense of the envoys. Once we head back at the entrance of Incarnate Devotion, you're actually given a choice whether to offer the incense or not, letting you freely choose which ending you want. It may lessen the impact like it's an on and off switch for an ending, but that also means not having to redo the entire game for an ending, much like with the first game and having to play twice for endings A and C. At the same time, the process to get here felt way more involved. It's somewhat easier to figure out, but it's also more time consuming. I guess it's up to preference. Delivering the incense on the boss portal doesn't change anything about the boss's behavior, so you should be good.
A mis ruegos respondéis con dolor. Dolor en la carne, mas vuestra misma carne soy. Dolor en el corazón, mas vuestro mismo corazón tengo. Vuestro legado no es otro que mi castigo. Y yo moriré. Moriré reconciliado con el misterio de haber nacido.
La devoción de tantos se hizo carne y sintió dolor. Esa aflicción llega a su fin, pues el icono cae y con él los designios y la caprichosa voluntad del milagro. Y vos ascenderéis en cuerpo y alma, atravesando reinos soñados, hasta el más santo de los lugares, cuna de todas las bendiciones, al amparo de nuestras miradas, donde quedaréis plasmado en el lienzo de la luz y el tiempo. La penitencia ha terminado.
In terms of postgame, Blasphemous 2 for the time being is very disappointing. There's not all that much left to explore. You have this side quest that consists of delivering a pendant into an abandoned house. Do you get anything from it? No, it just ends at nothing.
My disappointment.
Other than that, you can collect all remaining statues and marks of martyrdom and that's it. There's no New Game Plus with additional difficulty settings or Sacred Sorrows to keep yourself busy for a few more hours. And there's no pellets. Once you 100% it, there's not much of a reason to replay it. Now I know that's common in Metroidvanias actually, having the main incentive be driven by starting over and collecting everything again. So while a great title with plenty to like, I still prefer Blasphemous 1, at least for the time being. A new DLC has been announced for Blasphemous 2, teasing Mea Culpa's return in the trailer. I'm pretty sure the miracle did it. We still have yet to see what it will entail, but I look forward to it nonetheless.
That was terrible. I'm never coming back here.
If you can believe it, I'll return to Custodia once again. These are games that truly fascinate me, despite being flawed in some instances. But even with my share of grievances, I'd be willing to return in the long run. Hell, they even got me motivated enough to aim for all of the achievements in both games. They're just that good. With that said, I'm well aware I have unfortunately revealed most of the hidden tricks and endings for both games. But much like any other game, you may see it, but until you play it, you're not pulling off shit. I do hope these games end up clicking for others as they did for me, be it because of its mixture of Dark Souls and Metroidvania, or the sheer powerhouse of Spanish aesthetic. With that said, thanks for watching, and not much else to be honest. I guess just look forward to the regularly scheduled crap.